to the cloud. Ignite. I'm in one of those moods where I like have to verbalize everything I'm doing today. So apologize for that.
Not a problem.
Yeah, like it's a Wednesday. You're fine.
Yeah. It is Wednesday.
Mhm.
Hi, Kelly.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Mhm.
With the like black shirt and your hair in a bun, you look like a ballerina.
That's awesome.
Weird to say. But it's good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you too. How is everyone? How are you guys doing?
Good question.
I gotta stop saying guys. It's like a terrible part of my vocabulary that I just cannot get. No matter what I do, it's slips out
on myself.
Yeah.
That one took me a long time. I say folks now. Folks all the time. I like
I go too.
Mm-hmm.
But it's hard to replace.
Oh my gosh.
Since you've said forever.
I know, it is.
Yeah.
I'm doing all right. I think that I'm like still a little rattled from last week's events and just like the news and the state of the world and just, you know, gun violence and things. So
yeah, it's been tough week or so.
It's hard too because we're always on Zoom, and so I think conversations about things like that might more organically happen when we're face to face with people than like on Zoom sometimes or something.
Yes, I think
it feels like time we got to get through, you know.
And yeah, it's harder on Zoom for some reason to like really open up.
Yeah. But I do want to like continue to just sort of make space in this project and, you know, in these meetings too, for us to all have time to think about and talk about like anything that has been challenging, like for you or for your staff, with these really like unsettling events and really horrible, tragic things that are happening.
Should we give one more minute, or what do you think?
Yeah, maybe give people one more minute because people are still hopping in, I think. Hi, Chris. But how's everyone feeling? Is everyone doing okay?
I'd be lying if I said I wasn't stressed out and overwhelmed.
Oh, what's going on?
Just more of the same, the usual.
Yeah.
We don't have time to
I think our sentiment around here is we want to return to normal, but we don't even know what normal is anymore.
That is the truth.
Mm-hmm.
I feel your pain, Chris.
Yeah, and Erica, I think that's like kind of everyone's fear. Hopefully we can work together and make it better. Well, I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Oh, go ahead.
No, that was my intercom. That's why I muted quickly.
Oh.
Sorry.
Got it.
Cool. Well, we are going to be talking about volunteers and changing the culture around DEI. And we've got two speakers today who are going to speak with us about this. Monica Dangler, you are the interim director at Pima Animal Care Center. And Echo Keith, you are the, I can't remember your exact title.
It's a mouthful.
Yes.
Manager of volunteers and community events. They ran out of room to put youth programs too. So.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And you're at Animal Welfare League of Alexandria.
Yes.
Awesome. Um, so, Rory, am I off?
No, I think we were just going to talk about volunteer culture and just like change management and culture and things like that. Originally, we had like a diversity, equity, and inclusion component to this, but I think we're focusing mostly on change management. I think DEI is always at the focus of what we're trying to do here, but
Certainly.
that was
Okay.
all my chat was. Thanks, Kelly.
Oh, no worries. Monica, did you want to start off?
For sure.
Thank
Hello,
you.
everybody. Yeah, I'm Monica Dangler. I'm the interim director at Pima Animal Care Center. And prior to coming here, I was the volunteer manager at Austin Pets Alive for about 4 years. So I got to deal with lots and lots of volunteers. And definitely changing that culture is probably, that's the most difficult thing. It sounds, people are like, just change your culture. It's so easy. It's not. It's very painful and it's a long process. But one of the things that we did at APA, well, we did several things. But one of the big things we did was, which I would recommend everybody doing this, not even just for culture with your volunteers, but culture within your organization, is make sure you have some type of workplace expectations, workplace culture agreement. You might call them your core values. And I've got, if I can share, I've got an example of what PACS looks like. So you can see that. So it's really short and sweet. It's a 1-pager. We went through and we did this with all of the, we started with leadership and said, what do you want PAC to look like? And we did the same at Austin Pets Alive. And then, went down to, our line staff, put it out to volunteers, fosters, to our community, because everybody kind of needs to abide by this. This isn't just for staff. It's anybody coming into our organization or assisting our organization. It's our rescue partners. It's everyone. So we, got buy-in and, did some fine tuning of it and came up with this. And then we post it everywhere. It's on our bathroom doors. The volunteers have to sign off on this when they come in. Our fosters have to sign off on it. Everybody has to abide by that. And it really helps with when you have to have those hard conversations, to be like, hey, so how does this relate back to our workplace culture agreement, our workplace expectations, our core values? Because most of those conversations are, they were a little sassy with you, or they were beating up a rescue partner or something like that. And you can just tie it back to this. So that was one of the first things we did. The next thing we did was we came up with a volunteer vision statement. And this is, again, great for not just the volunteers, but it's great for your staff, for your community, for everybody you work with, to see what role do volunteers play in your organization. If your volunteers are going to only play a role of dog walking, great, that's what your volunteer vision statement should share. If they're going to be integrated throughout your entire organization, you need to let people know that. And that just, again, it helps set up expectations. And I've got a copy of that you guys can look at. It just helps set up expectations for people that want to volunteer for you, the community members, what they should expect from volunteers, and just, how you're going to interact with them. And that really, again, you can take those hard conversations back to the culture agreement and the volunteer vision statement, both to staff and to volunteers. It's really super helpful. The third big thing we did, which this is probably the most painful of all this, and that volunteer vision statement, again, we started with the top, kind of went through what do we want volunteers to look like, and then got feedback from not just our volunteers, but also the community. How do you think volunteers should be interacting with the organization? And then the third piece, which is, like I said, probably the most painful part, was we had a big town hall with the volunteers. And it was basically just, a bitch session, for lack of better terms, where our interaction with them was just tell us what you want. There was some ground rules, right? They couldn't repeat things over and over again. If they had a problem, they needed to have a solution with it. But it was just, a time for them to come in. They couldn't talk over each other, whatever, they couldn't come in without a solution. They could come and say, I hate it because it's really dark here at night and I can't walk the dog safely. And the solution is more lighting. Perfect, great. And we did this both at Austin Pets Alive and here, and it was amazing. Specifically, Austin Pets Alive, our volunteers, we were 100% volunteer based at the beginning, and then quickly changed to having a really large amount of staff. And the volunteers, even our good volunteers, were starting to get a little squirrely with us. And it's just because they just lost what their focus was, right? They didn't feel like they had, I guess a meaning in the organization. So really finding out some of those things, and a lot of the things that they were complaining about, it was great for us to know. They literally complained about that it was too dark to walk dogs. We're like, great, we'll put more lights up. So some of those things were really easy fix that had nothing to do with the culture, but it impacts the culture. They're mad because they can't walk as late at night. So they start bubbles up into other things. But that gave us a really great starting point where we could list out all of the complaints, group them into categories, and figure out what we were going to tackle first to help make those incremental changes. And, I don't know what the volunteer culture is like at Austin Pets Alive now, because we were probably halfway through that when I left, but I would guess, just from what I've heard, and Rory can probably speak to it more, but I would guess the change in those volunteers has been 100%, where they now have purpose, they have an outlet, they know how to communicate with the organization. Yeah, there's still some that are a little sassy, but you'll always have that, but you can have those conversations. So once we set put those tools in place and had those conversations, then it made it real easy when they would, when there wasn't maybe an alignment with the volunteer and the organization, to have those conversations really easy, or when they're just being squirrely, we can have those conversations. And that would be probably the very last step, would be have good communications with your volunteers, having a volunteer manager that can have those conversations quick and fast and productively. So they're just nip it in the bud right then and there and moving forward, and they can take action on it. Most of the time the volunteers are complaining. It's legitimate stuff. They're just going about it not the right way. And that helps us just communicate more thoroughly. So that would be my overall advice for the way to proceed. And then I'll just stop talking and I'll let Echo talk.
Well, similarly, we do have an agreement when our volunteers come on board. It's all about mutual respect for both our volunteers and our staff, but also recognizing that they are part of our team. So I actually started out in animal welfare through an organization called Lost Dog and Cat Rescue, which is pretty much 100% volunteers. And when I work with volunteers, I get the luxury of now integrating them into our organization to the point where they really are part of the team. They don't just walk dogs, they do admin work, they do our adoption follow-ups, they are our stray support squad, they do so many things. And I think for me, that's really the biggest part of a volunteer program being successful, is it being a part of your organization, welcoming your volunteers, being open, if tough decisions are made, including them, being transparent, all of those things that really make it a culture where they belong with your group. And it helps them be empowered to start new programs with us. A lot of our programs were actually an idea a volunteer had, which is great. They're things that as staff, we never would have had time to implement, but these volunteers have been able to work with us to initiate new programs, to help the community in new ways. And we always we ask for feedback. Whenever there's going to be a big change, before it happens, talk to our volunteers. We see how they're feeling about it. we've had things like it's too dark to walk dogs outside. We have blinkies for them now too, that blinky lights that they can wear. So yeah, things, I think the biggest thing is just they're part of the team, and respecting that they're giving you their time. And yeah, it's a big thing.
You guys have any questions? I know a couple people had asked if the slides could be shared, or the documents from the slides. Those are great. I had not seen the volunteer vision statement, but that was really cool.
Yeah, and I just dropped it in the chat, the volunteer vision statement, and I'll drop in the expectations as well for you guys, for sure.
Awesome.
Okay, I
Thank
guess
you.
I have a question in that we had about 200 volunteers before COVID, and now we have about 8 that were allowed in the building. How could we possibly do something like that without being able to bring everybody together? We can't get our staff to attend Zoom meetings, let alone volunteers. So that would be kind of hard to do.
I mean, I would just do it via Zoom, right? When we did it at AAPA, we had, gosh, 2,600 active volunteers and about 30 showed up, right? So it's the people that just have an axe to grind that are going to show up, and that's going to show up via Zoom. Same thing happened at PAC. It was just, you know, the ones that were just super mad. But great, it gives them an outlet, get it out of their system. They can complain about it. And then you can move on from there. You know, if the Zoom, I mean, Zoom, you can't really make it much easier than Zoom, right? But I mean, I guess you could probably even do like a online Google form. It says, what's your problem? What's your solution? So everybody could submit that. But that, you know, especially during COVID, right? You can't get everybody together in a room. That's not safe right now. But that might be some options.
And then do you have those meetings ongoing?
So we just had the one like complain all you want session. And then we still have monthly meetings. You know, during COVID, we upped it to weekly meetings with the volunteers because so much was changing and everybody just felt out of the loop because we were all just stressed out with life. As COVID's kind of slowed down a little bit, we've gone to once a month meetings, and then the volunteer manager sends out weekly, just like things to know. And you know, those conversations, even the weekly meetings, they're not just like, hey, come complain. We have an agenda of items and people can bring forth concerns, but really once that complaint session's done, you know, their next step is if you have a complaint, you should take it to the volunteer manager or volunteer coordinator, right? They should have been doing that all along, but it was more fun to get everybody riled up about it. And in situations where they're not going to the manager, they're getting everybody riled up. We just recently had that where one of the volunteers hated one of our rescue partners. It was taking our behavior dogs, of all things, and started an online bully attack against that rescue. So lots of volunteers piled in. They never brought it to our attention at all that they had concerns with this rescue. Instead, just took it to Facebook because where else would you take it? Right. And that just ended up being a Zoom conversation with those people that were part of that conversation on Facebook. And then from there, we had individual conversations as needed, right? Some just kind of jumped on and were like, yeah, you're right. But there were the people that were the instigators on it that had a much more serious conversation about the workplace expectations. That's not how we treat our rescue partners. Part of our expectations is we treat everybody with respect. So, you know, we've been having those conversations, and some of those conversations ended with, maybe I should take a break. Yeah, I think maybe you should. And other conversations were like, okay, I'll just complain, not on Facebook. Great, you complain wherever you want, just don't do it on Facebook and don't disrupt business, right?
So for our organization, I know this sounds strange perhaps, but COVID's actually allowed us so many new ways to communicate with our volunteers. We have, rather than calling them town halls, we have yappy hours monthly where we can chat, connect. Volunteers who haven't been able to come into the building because we have limited shifts or they're high risk, whatever their reasoning, we have so many at-home opportunities that they can do now. And a lot of those, again, were created by not only working with other staff and other departments, but asking volunteers, what can you do from home? And staying connected with them, having that weekly newsletter, going out, doing our Facebook Lives so that folks who couldn't come into the cat room could see which cats we had. We've created new training sessions that volunteers and sometimes our staff actually like to log into. So that's another distinction that we don't really have. Our staff are always welcome to attend any of our volunteer trainings, which is great. So I think for COVID, Zoom is definitely your friend, but it's also just really important to keep reaching out and keep giving them opportunities to help. We haven't thankfully had a lot of upset or angry volunteers, because I think in our I know it happens, but we've been really fortunate because I think they feel comfortable coming to us at this point whenever there is a concern, and we're able to discuss it before it becomes a bigger issue, which is hard when you're not all in the same building. But having that openness and availability whenever they have questions really helps.
And somebody asked in the chat if when writing your culture agreement, if you, for the first time in an organization, would you recommend that everyone on staff have a voice in drafting the agreement, or did management write it and bring it to staff as a completed document? I would say give every single person a voice in that. Definitely don't hold a community forum to do the draft. You'll be there forever. It'll be insane. But we had, management, and if you're in a private organization, you might start with your board of directors potentially to start that draft, have a pretty good skeleton of it, and then, then take it to the next, we had the managers write it, and then we took it to our coordinators and added more in, and then, or took stuff out, and then we took it to our staff, and then we took it to volunteers and fosters, and then we just put it out to the community. We actually have our advisory committee for the shelter. So we took it to the advisory committee and said, hey, are you guys good with this too? And they said, absolutely, we're great with it. So I would recommend getting all the voices you can on it, because that just really, when somebody's like, nah, I don't like it, blah, 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 you can well, we asked 5 million people for their input, and that's who created it. It wasn't just me. That helps with the buy-in. And we saw that a lot at APA. We tried implementing a couple dog walking expectations, because dog walkers are our largest group of population of volunteers, probably in most shelters, unless you're a cat shelter, then it's cat cuddling volunteers. So we, and that's where we were having the biggest challenges, was with those volunteers. So we tried, making some dog walking expectations, and we did that. Staff wrote it up, and we're like, here's what expectations are, and they just revolted, and it was just a war. So definitely get their buy-in. That was, a lesson learned. You can't just force it on them, because then you're just the man, making them do stuff, and they don't like that. And we want them to all have buy-in, whether it's staff or volunteers. It's not my organization, it's our organization. So, and ultimately we all want the same thing. It's just, in animal welfare, our communication's not always amazing. And we're all kind of trying to get there from different ways, because we're not communicating with each other to know what each other is doing and what things look like. So that would be my 2 cents.
Expectations are so important. One of the first things that I started working on when I moved into this role was formalizing all of our trainings. And we use volunteer mentors for most of our trainings. I highly recommend using volunteers for your trainings. It frees your time up to invest more in your volunteers. And it also gives you a sense of how everyone's feeling. They can be much more comfortable being trained by another volunteer than a staff member. And it's just so helpful. But yeah, having expectations for each role, what is a no, what is a yes. For us, we really emphasize safety, safety, safety and training. That's really the number one reason we might ask a volunteer to leave. Thankfully, we don't have to do that very often. So yeah, have your volunteers help you. That's, they can.
Absolutely. More hands makes the heavy lifting lighter, right?
For sure.
Monica, and Echo, I love what you're saying about getting input. How does, like, logistically, how do you get input from a whole bunch of people at once? Like, it sounds to me like terrifying. I just am curious to know about what the process looks like a little bit.
Yeah, for us, for like workplace expectations, with the staff, it's easier. You can call them together and make them sit in a room with you. But the volunteers are different. But that was, for the workplace culture and for the volunteer vision, we just sent out to them. We held one. I think it was pre-COVID, so we had an in-person meeting, but you could do it via Zoom to go for those people that need that question answer time with you. But otherwise, we just sent out, our draft, and we're like, this is what we want to do, and here's what we want to say. Do you have input on it? By the time it gets to the volunteers and fosters, it's usually pretty fine-tuned, unless you are totally off base. Like, unless your volunteer vision statement says, we only want the volunteers to pick up dog poop and scoop cat litter boxes. It's probably pretty good, right? You're like, we want to integrate volunteers into our organization at all levels. We want to provide leadership opportunities for them. If that's what your volunteer vision says, volunteers are usually fine with that, because that's what they want, right? You don't only get tons of feedback if you were completely off base of where you were trying to go with it. But yeah, we just emailed that out to them and said, please give us any, any follow-up or feedback on this, by X date. And you could even, include a Google form on that if you wanted to get, just so all the responses were back in one place. You could do it that way. Put the vision statement or workplace culture agreement as one of the questions, and then say, what would you change or whatever. That might be really simple too, so you don't have a million emails. And as far as putting it out to the community, that was really just, we put it out. I think we put it out via Facebook.
Yeah, we love Google Forms. So before even drafting things, we tend to send out a Google Form survey to see where everyone is, so that we have a starting point. Whether it's new volunteer roles, any sort of change that we're making, that, change is hard. And a way to make change a little bit easier is to include folks and their opinions. Depending on what it is, we make those anonymous. We find that for folks who might not want to engage directly, or maybe are not so great with potential conflict, those anonymous forms are really helpful. But yeah, I think just reaching out and giving people the opportunity to contribute if they want to is really important. Even for our trainings, we actually have our volunteer mentors review all of them before they're ever made formalized, because they're going to catch things that we might not, because they're right in it.
I was going to ask you a little more about that too, because just like, how does that process work, and how do you make sure it's the stuff you want to be training on and stuff?
Yeah, it's really helpful whenever we have a new role. For instance, we have our team gratitude, which are all of our volunteers who help us write donor thank you cards. And this is something that initially all of our managers had to do in their copious amounts of free time. So we started having volunteers help us. And our main volunteer, who was our first pilot volunteer for this role, is actually one of our mentors. She helped us create a great PowerPoint that she could train folks on over Zoom. And she took care of the whole onboarding process. I mean, she's just fabulous, which so many of our volunteers are. So really, depending on your level of trust in a volunteer, they can take over all of it, as long as you are reviewing it along the way to make sure it's in line with your organization's goals and values. It's the same for our adoption assistants, our dog walkers, our volunteers who update Pet Finder. Every volunteer has some sort of mentor who can help them along the way. And yeah, they help us with all of the edits. But I will say they even do, so for our training, it's a pretty detailed track. They have a checklist so that it doesn't get too confusing. But for instance, if they want to work with dogs, they take a dog body language class with one of our mentors, and that's over Zoom. Then they have a hands-on training, which we're still figuring out with COVID, with one of our volunteer mentors, and it just keeps going. So, yeah.
And Rory asked if we could speak a little bit on the future of volunteer integration, imagining volunteers throughout the organizational chart, and volunteer coordinators working with / under the HR director. Echo, do you want to start that off?
Sure. So, you know, I think we're moving towards that here as far as that integration. They even sign our confidentiality agreements before they move into admin roles. And I work really closely with our HR team so that they follow all of the same policies that we have for our staff. If they're going to be doing any of those roles that traditionally would have been staff. We keep their driver's license for our insurance, you know, for if they do transports with our vehicles. We had, you know, a volunteer couple drive to Tennessee to pick up 50 cats, for instance. You know, they love doing that. I think it's difficult to imagine for me. So our volunteer department is actually under community relations. So I can see it also fitting very well under HR, because really volunteer program management is HR with a twist. So I can see that happening. For us, it really does work well under community relations because they help us so much with that. But Monica may have a better idea of how that would work with HR.
Yeah, I don't know if it's better, but so what we were doing at APA and we've been doing here, it's not necessarily that it falls under HR, but it's really that your volunteer manager or coordinator functions more as the HR person for your volunteers, right? So, you know, especially if you have a large organization or you're a fully volunteer organization, one person cannot manage 500, 1,000, 1,500 people, right? It's impossible. And as a volunteer manager, not only are you managing 1,500 people, but you have to be the jack of all trades. You have to know how the Parvo ICU works. You need to know how the Ringworm Center works. You need to know how the neonatal nursery works. You need to know about adoptions. You need to know about return. You need to know literally everything and be an expert in it. And that's kind of silly to expect one person to literally be an expert in every single facet of your shelter, right? So instead of having one person that's trying to be this like miracle person, instead your volunteers are going to report directly to that manager or supervisor, right? So if you have a dog walking program manager or a dog program manager, your dog walkers and your kennel attendants and those guys are all going to report to them just like staff, because they're the expert about dogs, and your cat manager is going to have all those volunteers because they're an expert about cats, right? And then there might be some random, teams that report to the volunteer manager, their team specifically, because as a volunteer manager, you need to have a huge team of volunteers helping you. At APA, I had a team of about 50 volunteers that helped us with everything from making name badges to getting them through orientation and giving tours, And then there was the volunteers that did those additional trainings, that did the dog walking mentor sessions, that did the cat trainings. So just for that onboarding piece of the volunteers was a lot, and we could have used probably 100 volunteers, right? We can always use more volunteers than we've got. So that way, you know, I'm not the expert in everything. I probably have a good idea how most things work, but I don't need to know every single thing. But as the volunteer manager, then I'm onboarding your volunteers. I'm making sure the right people are going to the right places. And I'm helping you with writing those job descriptions and recruiting those volunteers. But as the manager of your program, you're making sure that you know, they're doing what needs to be done. And if they're doing something wrong, if they're walking the dog wrong or using the wrong kind of leash, they're having those conversations. And then I come in when they're being extra sassy, right? Just like your HR manager. HR person doesn't deal with because your employee is not doing their task correctly. HR manager is when there's some, you know, harassment happening, some, you know, some pretty severe performance things where they're going to start the write-up process, you know, or you're going to fire somebody. We're not going to fire volunteers the way we're going to fire staff, but having that person to partner with when you've had a conversation with somebody about walking a dog on a slip lead 5,000 times. Now it needs to bubble up and become more serious, right? And obviously we're going to give volunteers a little bit more slack. If it's a safety concern, it's going to be a little bit higher priority, but right, they keep showing up in shorts and they're not allowed to wear shorts. Whatever, we can keep having that conversation with them a few times, but maybe after they get scratched really bad and that dog has to go in bite quarantine, it bubbles up to the volunteer manager where we have a little bit more serious conversation about, is this the right fit for you, right? And those are the conversations that the volunteer manager is having. You know, is this activity the right fit? Not necessarily the organization, but it might be the organization. But most of the time, it's the activities aren't the right fit. How can we find a better fit for you? How can we get you the training you need so that you are able to do X, Y, and Z? So that's kind of more, you know, the HR piece of it. But, you know, as far as imagining volunteers throughout the organizational chart, you know, it's literally throughout the organizational chart. You should be able to have volunteers as leads and managers in your org, just as you have paid staff. So APA is a really great example, right? They've got, you know, directors, managers, leads, all of those things. And then there's also the same in volunteers. Most of their programs, right, when you're going to pilot a new program, especially with HOS and all of those things, you don't want to hire a brand new person to run a program that you don't, you know, you're still working it out. Get a, that's when you have a volunteer who starts that program, pilots it. They're the rehoming manager, right? They're going to recruit their volunteers, they're going to train them, they're going to do all of those things. And then when that program grows to the point where you're like, oh, this is a program, that's when you start implementing staff positions into it. And a lot of times you'll see that volunteer who started that program become the staff person that runs that program, right? So, you know, that's kind of what we're talking about. And, you know, right now is a perfect time as you're implementing these new programs to have these volunteers involved. Not every volunteer has 60 hours to implement a new program, right? 60 hours a week to implement a new program. Some of them have 10 hours. So, you know, maybe it's a group of volunteers that are implementing that rehoming program, and one of them is the main point person. And you might have to help them kind of work through that or what that looks like. And same with like leads. Leads is an easy way because sometimes, right, we have a whole bunch of dog walkers and we're like, what, you want me to put managers? What? Oh my God. Start with leads, right? Start with dog walking leads for the Monday morning shift and the Monday evening shift. And it's just a point person that the dog walkers can go to if they have questions, right? Kind of start it simple. I would absolutely make sure you have some type of expectations for those leads or for committee members. Anybody who's in a leadership position, they need to, it's not just the workplace culture expectations. A lot of them are going to have access to private information and things like that. So, have access to your database and things like that. So having those extra pieces in there and, just making sure that they know they are a leader within the organization. Their expectations are higher that you have for them than the average everyday volunteer. We did implement some committee work here, some committees here at PAC. And we're like, help us, figure out how to communicate better and do dog walking better and all the different committees. And setting that expectation up front. You guys are committee members, so we hold you to a higher.
Qualified animals include animals we're adopting and
making sure they have those expectations ahead of time is super helpful. Because we did have some committee members that were sassing off on Facebook. Hey, again, we have that conversation. You're a committee member. That means you are considered a leader in the volunteers here. Whether you think you're a leader or not, volunteers see you as an elevated volunteer. Here are these expectations. We ask if you could abide by being a committee member. You said yes, you signed it and said, yep, I can do all the things and not be naughty. How are we gonna move forward, right? And sometimes they say, oh, I didn't realize I don't want to be on the committee. I want to be able to be sassy on Facebook. And sometimes they're like, oh, okay, I didn't realize people saw me as a leader. So it all comes back to just those expectations, but start putting those leads in positions, and a lot of those volunteers just naturally come about. Maybe you're implementing volunteer adoption counselors. There's usually that one volunteer that's like the gun-ho volunteer that can volunteer 20 hours a week, 30 hours a week, and that are doing all the right things, that aren't like messing things up. Approach them, hey, would you want to be the lead for this? We just would need you to train the volunteers and kind of communicate out with them what, any updates with the counseling positions. So you start naturally putting those in. It's not something you would immediately have 50 leads or anything like that, but as those, sorry, I've got a cat laying next to me. I think she's dreaming and she keeps like chattering, which is kind of distracting. As those naturally occur, add in those positions, let staff know, right? The big pushback you're going to get with staff and volunteers is staff thinks you're implementing volunteers so you can eliminate their job. Every single one of them thinks that no matter what, let them know. We had one staff member who said flat out, I think you're trying to eliminate my job and that's why you want volunteers to do my job. I'm like, no, I actually want to be able to elevate you. You're currently, a specialist. If I can put 10 volunteers underneath you that you're managing, that's helping you do your job, that gives you management experience on your resume. I can then elevate you to a coordinator level because you have that experience. You currently don't have that experience. I want this program to grow bigger and you're going to be the person that manages it. So, having those conversations with them, it is good. And then again, the workplace culture agreement and the volunteer vision statement, when it says that, you can have those conversations with staff. And as you onboard new staff, this is how we see volunteers helping us. So get used to it. You're not going to be able to not have volunteers help you.
And I find you get more buy-in, the more they benefit from that volunteer help as well. So there's resistance in the beginning until they start having time to breathe again, even if just a little bit. And then you start having people come ask you, hey, can volunteers help with this? Can I help with this? And more roles get created. So there can definitely be some limitations in buy-in in the beginning, but
yeah, definitely
really well.
Yeah, once you start getting them in, then they start buying in. I think the hardest thing to do for your staff is you add volunteers or volunteer leads for them is setting the staff's expectations that they're not staff and that they can't work 40 to 60 hours a week, or they may not work 40, 60 hours a week. So sometimes they're like, I need a person to help with adoptions. I need them from 8 to 5 every single day. I'm like, so they actually have to be here for 8 hours every, and they're like, yep. And I'm like, okay, well, you're not gonna get any volunteers to do that. Can they be here 4 hours? You know, can they be here 2 hours? So you have to just break it down and think about what increments, right? It needs to be beneficial for both. To have a adoption counselor come in for only 1 hour at a time, not beneficial to us, right? But to have them come in for 4-hour increments, absolutely, that is beneficial. So your different, you know, your volunteer activities are going to have different hour requirements. And we do volunteer job descriptions, just like we do staff job descriptions. So it says you need to be available this many hours on these days, and here's your work. Again, so when they're fooling around, we had this when we implemented our adoption counselors. We had a whole bunch of adoption counselors that were allowed to come in and out whenever they wanted. So they would just show up when their friends were coming in and then take that puppy really fast and adopt it out. That wasn't helpful to us. That just caused more chaos. We needed volunteers that could work 4 hours at a time, that could handle all of the dogs, not just puppies and not just smalls, and who just weren't just coming in when their friends wanted to come adopt a dog. So, you know, we put those expectations in. We said, hey, we're redoing this. If you can meet these expectations and want to volunteer with us as an adoption counselor, do this. A lot of those people were very upset because they didn't want to handle the hard dogs. The hard dogs are the ones that we need the adoption counselors for the most. So we, you know, slowly got them implemented and put those people in place. So it, you know, having those expectations is super helpful, and it's been way more impactful to add 4 volunteers that come in 1 4-hour shift a week than have 20 volunteers who come in when they feel like it, and they don't tell you, they just show up and all of that stuff. So, you know, once your staff kind of see that you're not just trying to like shove volunteers onto them, you're like, this is your problem now. It's, you're actually wanting to help them. That's really super helpful for them to do that.
Well, I think talking to your staff about, like you were saying, setting expectations of a volunteer versus a staff member, but also how to work with volunteers. Hopefully, you know, you're appreciating staff as well, but there's an extra level of appreciation that you have to give for volunteers. You have to recognize the wonderful ways they're helping you, whether it's that they just stuffed a tray full of Kongs for you, or they just got your longest stay dog or cat adopted. Like all of these things, you have to recognize it. And people skills are really important. So if you're putting volunteers under another staff member, you need to talk to them about it. And it's something that's really beneficial if you can do organizationally. We have our all staff meetings where we talk about different topics, and one of them is how to work with volunteers, both our adult and youth volunteers. So.
Awesome. Jamie, I see you have some comments in the chat. Did you want to talk a little more about those? Seems really cool.
Yeah, so Gateway Pet Guardians, the organization that I was with prior to Haas, was we went through Service Enterprise with Points of Light. Best Friends sponsored us to go through that with them. Best Friends actually led it, the process.
Oh, wait. What does that mean?
Yeah. So I was actually, before you called on me, I was looking for the link for Service Enterprise. So Service Enterprise is when you are Service Enterprise certified, you are essentially certified in the top 11% of all nonprofits in the country regarding volunteer management. So Best Friends has folks that on their team that learned the process from Points of Light, which is the nonprofit organization. And then they've been teaching animal welfare organizations this and getting them certified through Points of Light. So they asked us if we wanted to go through it. We did. It was an 18-month process, and it was really scrutinizing everything volunteer wise and gave us an action plan, and it gave it to us in really digestible pieces. And they have characteristics that you're looking at, leadership characteristic, planning and development, training and orientation. So our training and onboarding. So they really break it apart for you. And you start at the beginning and say, how are you utilizing volunteers right now? How does that equate to return on volunteer investment? So you really put like a number, a tangible number to it. And one of the cool things that we did was they tell you what a volunteer hour is worth in this area that you live in the state or whatever. And so we put that to the number of volunteer hours that we were tracking. We could not get our volunteers to track their time for anything before this, but we made it a really big point by going through this process and saying it's really important. We want to be able to show what we're doing. And so we put a slide on like an impact statement that we have that said, it was $252,000 a year that it saved by utilizing volunteers that were tracking their time, which is really impactful. And that motivates volunteers to be tracking their time then, because they can really see what they're doing. But anyway, back to Service Enterprise. The whole certification process is just really, really cool. And it makes you dig in at every level, leadership level, at a management level, by saying, if you could build your ideal team, what does that look like? And that helped create buy-in from the team members. Job descriptions, like you guys were just talking about, hugely important, and SOPs for what they're doing in their job so that they are set up for success. But at Gateway, we built, we were very volunteer heavy, like more volunteer heavy than ever staff heavy. That's how the organization really grew. So volunteers are very near and dear to my heart. I'm going to find the link too and share it.
Thank you. You guys have any questions?
Also, I think that they offer this for a fee. Like I think Points of Light does offer this training, and I don't know that it's cheap necessarily, but I will tell you it's worth every penny, and something that I think would be really great for a grant ask.
Are you just looking for the website, the Points of Light website, or something specific, Jamie? Okay.
I realized I muted myself. I just put it in there, the Service Enterprise specific piece of it.
It looks really neat.
So how do you go about finding the right people for the right jobs?
For me, I think it's about getting to know your volunteers as people and what makes them excited and happy to come in every day. So there are some volunteers who are great with our animals, but I would never ask them to be a front desk volunteer. Not only because it wouldn't work out so well, but because they would hate it. So it's really important to find the things that they not only are good at, but that they actually enjoy and not burn them out.
One of the things we did was, or we do, is each volunteer activity, we determine what is the minimum hour requirement or time commitment needed, right? What are the skills that are needed? And what the skills are needed. So when a volunteer applies, we say, how often do you want to volunteer, right? So that's the first question they might say. And we found about 75% of the people want to volunteer less than 1 hour a week. So keep that in mind when you're doing your activities, right? Because we want to a lot of our activities we can adjust, so it's not as long. A lot of people want to do at-home activities too. So, where can you volunteer? How often do you plan on coming in? What can you commit to? And then what activities do you want to do? We had like a list of, we didn't have a list of the activities, but we had like, the big ones, dog walking. I want to do volunteer admin support, cat care. I want to work in the medical. And and then we took all of those things and made a little chart and said, and we grouped the activities based on what we needed from them. So if you needed to volunteer, so all of our medical activities, right? You needed to volunteer at least 4 hours a week or longer because the training time was extensive, right? And it's life or death. If that volunteer isn't able to come in for 4 hours or can't come in weekly, then you're not going to help us. In fact, you might hurt some of the animals, right? So we have that category, our life-saving stuff. We have another category that's less than 1 hour a week. Those are things like doing laundry, washing bowls, stuffing Kongs, poop scooping. There's a whole bunch of things. I mean, actually, a lot of the volunteer administration stuff was in there. because a lot of the things that we needed was at-home things that just took 15 minutes. They needed to check and look at something and email people an email. So it was really quick, easy things. And then there was a group that was like an hour to 2 hours a week. And that was like some of the cat stuff. Our small dog opportunities were in there. Stuff that doesn't take quite as much training, but a little bit more than that, less than a week, once a week. And then we had the 2 to 3 hours, which was your things that took a little bit more training, but not as much as medical. But it was your dog walking, right? You're going to take a fair amount of our resources to get through every one of those dog levels. You're going to take a fair amount of our resources to do, X, Y, and Z. So those things were in that category. So we could just shift it back to them when we got their application. We'd look and be like, okay, you said you can come in less than once a week. You said you wanted to do this thing. Perfect. That fits in that category. We'd be like, great. You can get started. This looks like, we weren't making them do it. We're like, this looks like this would be a really great fit for you. And if nothing was a fit, we're like, hey, nothing looks like a fit. Look at this chart and tell us if there's something here you'd like to do that you're able to make the commitment for. What we found was 75% of people said, I don't want to come in more than once I want to come in less than once a week for an hour. But when we said, oh, but to walk dogs, you got to come in for 2 hours a week. They're like, oh, I can totally come in 2 hours a week. I didn't really know, but I really want to walk dogs. So we're like, perfect, great. And then the other thing we found prior to implementing this was we would ask people, what do you want to do? And the overall result was they said, I want to do whatever you need me to do, right? So that said, I don't really know. So that helps us guide them. The other thing that we then also did, so we gave them, we're like, here's some ideas, but you still got to do a tour and you got to do other stuff. The other stuff that they have to do is they would do what we called jump starts. So they would partner with us for 1 session 3 times before they were cut loose. And during those times, they would do those essential duties, scoop and poop, doing the laundry, washing bowls, all the stuff that needs to get done that nobody wants to do. And during that time, that also gave the volunteer team a chance to talk to them, for them to get to know them so they knew who to talk to and to answer their questions. Because a lot of times people are like, I think I would like to walk dogs. We're like, great, why don't you go do tuck-in time where you'd put blankets down for the dogs. And they're like, oh, these dogs are all really big and kind of scary. I don't think I want to do that. Maybe I want to do cats, right? So then their next jump start, we would have them help in the cattery, and they're like, oh, this is perfect. This is the right thing, right? So it kind of helped them guide through to the right place. It also gave them a lot more, now I can't think of the word for it, but they were prepared when they were done. They were comfortable with the organization. They knew where to go. They knew where things were located. And if they came in, they at least knew how to do laundry or wash bowls or whatever it was. So they could just go straight to that and do it. And what we found is all of those horrible activities that nobody likes to do were being filled by people that weren't jump starts. People are like, I just want to do something helpful, and laundry is so easy, and I just go in and I put it in. I try not to stick my fingers in poop, and it's great, and bam, right? So we started finding that some of those jump starts we had to take off because we had too many volunteers doing that. And it also not intimidated, but it peer pressured the existing volunteers that were there that were like, staff needs to scoop my poop for me. what? No, we don't. No, you can scoop your own poop. It peer pressured them into scooping their own poop because they saw these new volunteers that were scooping poop with a smile on their face. They're like, yeah, I'm scooping poop. This is the best day ever. And they're like, oh, I kind of look like a jerk, don't I? So they were starting to scoop their kennels as well. And people were coming in just to scoop poop in the kennels, which I don't know about your shelter, but I've never worked in a shelter that had not enough poop to scoop, right? There's always like an overabundance of it, whether it's cat poop or dog poop. So they were coming in, scooping the poop and all of that, which just makes, right, everybody's life better. They're happy. The dog walkers are happy that they're not having to scoop their poop. The customers are happy that it doesn't smell like poop and they're not stepping in it. So it's win-win-win.
We actually, for our prospective volunteer info sessions, we call them info sessions rather than orientations because we want it to be an opportunity for them to get to know us and what sorts of roles that we have for our volunteers. And there's a line, there's poop, lots of poop. It's very important to set that expectation. Even if you do admin, there's a cat in there, they're gonna poop.
Totally. Well, thank you guys so much. We really appreciate you being here today. And next week we are going to have Claire Callison and Jordana Murby, who are going to be talking with us about transport, the big transport APA just did, and different aspects of it. So thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful week.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Rory.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. See you later.